He was only 20 years old at the time, yet there was a stillness on his face that belonged to someone much older. Not the stillness of exhaustion, but the kind that comes from having lived quietly inside oneself for far too long. His eyes were deep, hidden beneath long lashes, carrying a softness that felt almost dangerous to look at for too long. His skin was clear, almost luminous, and his lips carried a permanent, gentle smile, as if he wasn't smiling at the world, but at a secret he carried only for himself. His hair was always slightly messy, never styled deliberately, yet it somehow framed his face in a way that made his beauty more visible, not less. His height was neither tall nor short, but the way he walked, calm, unhurried, dignified, made people look at him without realizing why. I had never seen a boy like him before, not just in the way he looked, but in the way he existed. There was grace in how he spoke. His voice had a softness that didn't ask for attention but received it anyway. Every word he spoke felt like it traveled gently, settling somewhere deep inside the listener. Our story didn't begin with a dramatic moment. No rain, no music, no sudden realization. It began in a very ordinary place. A part of the city where young men gathered in the evenings at roadside tea stalls. The kind of place where conversations floated in the air with cigarette smoke and half-finished dreams. I used to sit there alone most evenings, a book in my hand, though my eyes rarely stayed on the pages. I read words, but I watched life. That evening, he sat down on the chair across from me. First, he was just a stranger. Then he smiled and asked, "Is that book any good?" I looked up at him and forgot how to answer. There are moments that don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, like a key turning slowly in a long-locked door. Something inside me opened that evening, without noise, without permission. We started talking about the book, then the city, then loneliness, and before we realized it, time had slipped away from us completely. He told me that even in crowds he felt alone. I listened, because his words sounded like my own reflection. After that day, he began coming to the same place at the same time. Sometimes I arrived first. Sometimes he did. And on days when he didn't show up, a strange restlessness stayed with me, as if someone had left a promise unfinished. Our friendship grew quietly. First it was tea, then long walks, then late-night phone calls that stretched until silence felt more comfortable than words. He recited his favorite poems to me. I listened without interrupting. His voice carried more weight than the poetry itself. Sometimes, while laughing, he would place his hand on my shoulder, and my heart would react in a way I didn't yet have a name for. This wasn't an ordinary friendship. There were fewer questions and more understanding. We could read each other without speaking. When he grew quiet, I knew there was a storm inside him, and I stayed quiet with him, letting him know he wasn't alone. One evening, I told him, "You're my closest friend." He smiled, but something inside me trembled, because closeness like this doesn't stay within boundaries forever. Still, we never named it. Perhaps we were afraid that naming it would change everything. His presence slowly became part of my life. Then, without warning, it became a need. When he was near, the noise of the world softened. Our footsteps matched when we walked together. When our fingers brushed accidentally, the moment stayed with me like a silent promise. When I looked into his eyes, I felt he was hiding the same things I was trying not to feel. One evening, a light breeze moved through the air, clouds drifting slowly above us. We sat on a bench for hours, shoulders touching. Neither of us moved away. There was peace in that closeness. Quietly, he said, "I like being with you. Very much." "I do too," I replied, but my voice carried everything I couldn't say. He laughed softly, the kind of laughter that only comes from familiarity. Then he looked at me for a long moment. His gaze traveled from my eyes to my lips and back again. My heartbeat quickened. Yet there was no discomfort, only warmth. We both knew the truth now. This was no longer just friendship. Still, we continued calling it that. Sometimes he touched my hair lightly, as if joking, but the intensity in that touch said otherwise. Our nights grew longer with conversations, silences, laughter, and sudden emotions. One day I told him, "When I'm with you, I feel more beautiful. He smiled, but something inside me broke and healed at the same time. We were moving closer without hurry, without pressure. Just letting feelings find their own way. There are moments in life when nothing happens, yet everything changes. That evening arrived quietly. The sky had been restless all day, clouds drifting without urgency, as if they too were unsure of where they belonged. We had been walking along the road, side by side, speaking less than usual. Our silences had learned how to walk together. Then the rain began. Not sudden, not dramatic, just a soft, steady fall, as if the sky had finally exhaled. We stopped beneath a small roof near a closed shop. The sound of rain hitting the ground surrounded us, isolating us from the rest of the city. People passed by, blurred shapes moving quickly through the wet streets. But inside our small shelter, time slowed. We stood very close, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body through the thin distance between us. Close enough that his breathing became noticeable. Not loud, not hurried, just present. He looked at me, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. No rain, no city, no past, only his eyes. There was something different in them now. Clarity, a softness sharpened by honesty. As if he had finally stopped hiding from himself and from me. The rain continued to fall, but it felt distant. He smiled slowly and reached out. Not toward my hand, not toward my face, but toward my sleeve. His fingers wrapped around the fabric gently, almost cautiously, as if asking permission without words. That single gesture held more meaning than any confession ever could. I wanted to stop time right there. I wanted to memorize the weight of that moment. The way his fingers felt, the way his eyes searched my face, the way my heart seemed to understand something before my mind did. We didn't say anything, but we understood everything. From that evening onward, touches became part of our language. Not bold, not demanding, accidental fingers brushing while walking. His hand resting briefly on my arm when he laughed. The way he sometimes leaned closer when speaking softly, his shoulder finding mine as if by instinct. Each touch carried care. Each touch carried restraint. Sometimes he would sit across from me and study my face quietly. When I asked what he was looking at, he'd smile and say, "You're changing." "How?" I asked once. "You've softened," he replied. I knew the truth. That softness belonged to him. We began doing small things for each other. He remembered how I liked my tea. I remembered the poems he loved. These gestures seemed insignificant to the world, but inside us, something deep was growing. One evening, while walking together, he stopped suddenly. "I get scared sometimes," he said. "Of what?" I asked. He looked away before answering. "Of this feeling. Of what happens when I'm with you." I reached for his hand. Not tightly, not desperately. Just enough to let him know he wasn't alone. He looked at me again, and the fear in his eyes softened into relief. After that, we grew even closer. But the noise didn't increase. The silence simply grew deeper. We could sit together for hours without doing anything. Sometimes his head leaned against my shoulder when he was tired, and I felt strangely honored by the trust in that gesture. There was no rush in our bond, no demands, no expectations, just a steady flow, pulling us gently toward each other. His laughter became my weakness. My silence became his shelter. We both knew the truth now. This connection had moved far beyond friendship. Yet we didn't break it. We didn't label it. We simply let it live. Every meeting carried a soft anticipation, as if my heart recognized him before my eyes did. When he arrived, my gaze found its way to his face automatically. His lashes, the curve of his lips, the smallest expressions that had become familiar to me. Sometimes, while sitting close, he would take my hand lightly, letting our fingers rest together. The warmth of his skin felt like reassurance, that whatever this was, it was safe. One evening, the sky was painted red with dusk as we walked along the roadside. He stopped suddenly and turned toward me. "I don't feel like leaving you," he said quietly. There was a tremble in his voice. I looked into his eyes and saw it all: desire, trust, vulnerability. He didn't promise anything. He didn't need to. He simply stood closer. And that closeness said everything. There comes a time in every quiet love when silence begins to feel heavy. Not because it is empty, but because it is full. Our silences were no longer just pauses between words. They had weight, meaning, intention. He began to sit across from me and watch me without pretending otherwise. His gaze lingered, thoughtful, almost reverent, as if he were trying to memorize something before it changed. Sometimes he'd smile and say, "Your quiet pulls me toward you." And I would think that his laughter was the most dangerous thing I knew, because it made me want to stay. One afternoon, under pale sunlight, his fingers moved slowly through my hair. Not playfully, not casually, carefully, like someone touching something fragile and precious. There was no hurry in that moment, only belonging. That night, he sent me a message saying he was thinking of me. I replied with a single word, "Me too." And somehow, that one word carried the entire night within it. He began talking about the future, not with grand promises, but with gentle curiosity. "I like how tomorrow feels when you're in it," he said once. I didn't respond with certainty. I leaned into him instead. Sometimes closeness is the only answer that feels honest. With him, I didn't need to become anything else. I didn't need to hide my edges or smooth myself out. He accepted me as I was, and I found myself doing the same for him effortlessly. We moved closer, slowly, respectfully, like two people protecting something delicate from the world. Sometimes he touched my forehead and said, "There's too much thought here." I would hold his hand and think that the reason for all those thoughts was standing right in front of me. Our love, if it could now be called that, never announced itself. It didn't demand space or recognition. It simply took root quietly, deep inside us. One evening, as we sat together watching the lights soften into dusk, neither of us felt the need to move forward or backward. We were already exactly where we needed to be. He took my hand, not firmly, not weakly, just enough for me to understand that this hand no longer belonged to a stranger. I felt a calm settle inside me, deep and steady. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. In his eyes, there was contentment. In my silence, there was acceptance. The connection didn't promise us anything, but it completed something within us. He, once a stranger, had become the safest place in my heart. And we both knew that what had brought us here was real. Soft. Enough. They simply become inevitable. By now, our lives had begun to bend gently toward one another, as rivers do when they recognize the same sea. There was no moment where we sat down and decided anything. No words like "what are we" or "where is this going" were ever spoken. We didn't need them. We were already there. He began to fall silent more often when we were together. Not because there was less to say, but because he no longer needed words to feel understood. Sometimes he would sit beside me and just look ahead, his presence steady, grounding. I learned the shape of his silences. When he was tired, his shoulders softened. When he was thinking, his jaw tightened slightly. When he felt safe, he leaned closer without realizing it. Those small details became my language. One afternoon, we were sitting somewhere quiet, sunlight slipping gently through the air. He rested his head against my shoulder without warning. The weight of it surprised me, not physically, but emotionally. He trusted me enough to rest. I stayed still, afraid that even breathing too loudly might disturb the moment. That was when I realized something irreversible. I had stopped imagining my days without him. We didn't talk about exclusivity. We didn't make promises. But we showed up for each other. If one of us was quiet, the other noticed. If one of us needed space, it was given without offense. If one of us needed closeness, it was offered without question. Sometimes, while walking, he would take my hand naturally, then pause as if remembering the world, and gently let go. But even after his fingers left mine, the warmth stayed. Moments lingered longer than they should have. He once said, half smiling, "I don't know when you became home." I didn't answer. I just stood closer. That was my way of saying you are mine too. The world around us continued, loud and impatient, but inside our connection there was patience. We moved carefully, respectfully, as if both of us understood that rushing could break something sacred. At night, our conversations stretched into quiet hours. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we simply stayed on the line, listening to each other breathe. When silence came, it didn't feel empty. Felt shared. I noticed how his presence softened my fears, how my presence steadied his restlessness. We were becoming anchors for one another without trying to be. And somewhere along the way, fear stopped leading. Not because it disappeared, but because trust became stronger. We never said this is love. But love knew us anyway. There are endings that do not feel like endings. They arrive quietly, settle gently, and instead of closing something, they complete it. That moment came to us without ceremony. We were sitting together as evening slowly folded into night. The sky was dimming, colors softening, the world growing less demanding. Nothing unusual surrounded us. No music, no dramatic sky, no sudden realization. Just us. He looked at me and smiled. It was the same smile that had stayed with me since the beginning. The one that didn't try to impress, didn't ask for attention. The one that felt like recognition. He reached for my hand. Not tightly, not hesitantly, just enough. Enough to tell me that this hand was no longer unfamiliar. Enough to say that whatever had grown between us had found its place. I felt the warmth of his palm settle into mine, and with it came a deep, steady calm. The kind of calm that doesn't excite the heart, but reassures it. We didn't speak. Words felt unnecessary now, almost intrusive. In his eyes there was peace. In my silence there was acceptance. We had not promised each other forever. We had not named what we were. Yet somehow we were complete. He, the beautiful boy who had once been a stranger across a tea stall, had become the most protected space inside my heart. And I knew, without doubt, that I had become something similar for him. What brought us here had not been urgency or desire alone. It had been patience, care, listening, the courage to stay without demanding certainty. Our love never raised its voice. It didn't announce itself to the world. It didn't ask for approval. Simply existed, soft, deep, and honest. I pressed his hand gently, and he lowered his head slightly, as if acknowledging something sacred between us. And in that quiet moment, without declarations or conclusions, our story completed itself. Not because it ended, but because it had finally become whole.